Hi everyone, Elliot Jacobson here for Advanced Advantage Play. And today I want to talk about the easiest way to beat Baccarat. And no, it isn't some voodoo like looking at the board and thinking you see a pattern and getting lucky because you happen to choose right and then thinking that that luck has anything to do with actually beating the game. What you need in order to beat any casino game is information. And by far, the easiest way to beat any casino game that is out there is by card counting a side bet. And Baccarat in particular has not only a lot of vulnerable side bets, but it also allows large wagers typically on these side bets, much more than on blackjack where you might be restricted to $25. So the easiest way to beat Baccarat is card counting side bets. All right, I want to just have an example side bet to base everything around. I want to talk to you about all the information that I've collected about a variety of side bets. So we're going to focus on the Blazing Sevens Baccarat side bet. It's kind of a relatively new side bet. It's been around for just a couple of years, but it is a particularly vulnerable side bet. So we're going to go through everything you need to know on this one side bet. So let me just sort of remind you what this is. First of all, this is a side bet that pays 50 to 1 if the hand ends up in a 7-7 tie with both sides having two cards, both the player and the banker. It pays 200 to 1 if it's a 7-7 tie with three cards each. The house edge on this is 7.78%. That is a hefty house edge. And most notably, if you play this side bet without any information, you're going to hit this side bet, hit a winning outcome about once out of every 88.7 hands. So that is very infrequent. So think about a tie. This is not just a tie. This is a 7-7 tie. And it's not just a 7-7 tie. It is a 7-7 tie with both sides, player and banker, having the same number of cards. So that's the side bet. And let's go through all of the details that you see in this chart to the right-hand side and make sure that we understand all of that because every bit of it is important to you. First of all, you see right at the top, I have a count system. And so I want to talk about this count system and explain why it's kind of intuitively obvious. And I actually come up with this system by using some rather sophisticated math I'm not going to go into right now. But let's actually go through this count system. First of all, aces are 1. All right, we are glad when aces leave. So a positive number for a count system is when you're happy to see a card go. So when the ace is +1, why? Because you can't really hit much and get to a 7. Right? So if you don't have a 7-7 two-card tie, an ace is not going to get you a 7-7 three-card tie. A 2 might get a tie if, for example, the player has a 5 and gets that 2, but otherwise it's not a very useful card. The cards that are definitely useful for drawing a third card and getting a total of a 7 are 3, 4, and 5, and so we are sad to see those leave. We have a -1 tag on those. Next is a 6. Again, not a particularly useful card because if you're drawing to a 0, you're not going to get to a 7. And for a lot of hands, this will just take you higher than 7. Now, of course, 7s, we are very sad to see those leave the shoe. They have a count tag of -6. 8s and 9s, we're very happy to see those leave the shoe. Why? Because if an 8 or a 9 is dealt on the first card, I mean, if we have a natural, you're not even going to get you're certainly not going to have a 7-7 tie, and you're not going to draw a third card. Moreover, if you do draw an 8 or a 9, you don't get to a total of 7. It just doesn't happen. So we are really happy to see these cards leave. And finally, 10, Jack, Queen, and King. Again, you cannot hit a 5 through 0, get a 10, Jack, Queen, or King, and get to a total of 7. So we're glad to see those go. So this is intuitively obvious. This is a card counting system. I have to just assume that you will take the time to learn how to count cards, what that means. I'm not going to go through that in this video. But here it is, the counting system for the Blazing Sevens Baccarat side bet. All right, now let's focus on that chart over to the right-hand side and go through each one of those items and make sure you understand what it is. First of all, the trigger true count. When you are using this count system, You will have a running count. That's simply the tally of all the numbers you've collected as the cards were played. You will divide that by the number of decks remaining in the shoe. That'll get you a true count. And the trigger true count is when you play the side bet. It means the edge has shifted to your favor. So the true count for the Blazing 7 side bet is +4. All right, bet frequency. How often when you're playing Baccarat will you encounter a situation where the count is +4 or higher? For this bet, the bet frequency is 19.68%, which means about 1 in 5 hands you will actually have a situation where you'll have the advantage over the house on this bet. So if you have a typical shoe then that has 80 hands in it, then what are we looking at? 20% of 80 is 16 hands in a typical shoe that you might have an edge. That's a lot of hands to have an edge. All right, so this is the percent of hands on which you make the side bet. It's the same as the percent of hands where the true count equals or exceeds the trigger count. Next up is the average edge. So what is that? Well, you won't have the edge on every hand when you make a side bet. So what we're talking about is when you do have the edge, when the count's in your favor, on average, what is your edge? Sometimes it'll be lower than the number given here, 10.44%, sometimes higher. But on average, when you do have the edge, you will have a 10.44% edge over the Blazing 7's bet. So can you imagine you're sitting at Baccarat and 1 in 5 hands you have a 10% edge over the house? That's what's happening with this side bet. That is a huge vulnerability. All right, 1 in 5 hands you have a 10% edge. Blows me away to even think about that. All right, the units 1 per 100 hands is exactly what it sounds like. Look, we're not going to play every single hand, but we're still going to count every hand at which we're at the table as a card counter. So when I talk about units 1 per 100 hands, I'm not talking about 100 hands that you play. I'm talking about 100 hands that you sit there and witness and are card counting the game. You will bet on some of those, not bet on some others. So what is the result on average after 100 hands have gone by? Well, on average, you will have won 2.05 units. Now, you may actually want to know something in particular, like if my bet is $100, and I play 100 hands, how much will I win? So in this case, you simply would take that 2.05 and multiply it by 100, and you would get what? $205. So a typical card counter who's making a $100 wager whenever the true count is +4 or higher will win about $205 per 100 hands in the long run. Now, let me just make a quick statement here about bet frequency, because we have to be concerned with what's called volatility, right? Sometimes we can go a long time without winning this bet, even when we have the edge. So that bet frequency I talked about earlier on, 88.7% or 88.7 hands is the average number of hands between wins. Well, if you are a card counter, that might drop significantly. You might win 1 out of 80 hands or 1 out of 75 hands. But you have to know you are still losing. You could lose 70 hands in a row easily as a card counter at this side bet. So this is not a free lunch. This is something that is going to have a very bumpy ride to it. And standard deviation measures just how bumpy that ride is. It measures the volatility of the game. And here we see the standard deviation is 10.77. That is a very high number. Now, just to give you some context, a day job where you get a salary has, of course, 0 volatility, except, of course, if you're fired or get sick or whatever. But a day job where you're working all the time and getting a salary has volatility 0, SD equals 0. A lottery, on the other hand, has very, very large volatility. You know, if you have one of these national lotteries where your chances are 1 in 100 million of winning, then it doesn't matter how big the prize is. The likelihood of your winning is going to be astronomically against you. Baccarat, just the ordinary game player banker, on average has a standard deviation of about 0.95, And blackjack, on average, has a standard deviation of about 1.13 to 1.15, somewhere in that range, depending on the rules, how you play the game. So what we're actually interested in here, just like we were interested in the win rate per 100 hands, we're interested in the standard deviation per 100 hands. And this depends on whether you're playing every single hand, as you might be if you were an ordinary blackjack card counter, or you're sitting out hands waiting for that trigger true count to exceed 4, or whatever the number is for the game you're playing. So it takes a little bit of extra math to figure out the standard deviation per 100 hands. But you see, again, for the blazing sevens, this very, very large standard deviation of 47.75 per 100 hands. So it does take into account the frequency the wager is made. And the last thing I want to tell you is this number called the Desirability Index. This was invented by a mathematician and blackjack expert named Donald Schlesinger. And it is a very weird formula. You see it down below, but let me just explain essentially what we're talking about here. There are these two numbers, right? There is our units 1 per 100 hands. What we want is that to be as large as possible, right? We want to win a lot. On the other hand, what we would like is the standard deviation to be as small as possible. We want as little variance in our win rate as we can. So what we are all after when we gamble with an advantage is a large win rate and a small standard deviation. Well, for the DI, a large win rate makes the DI larger. Meanwhile, a small standard deviation, remember, if you divide by something small, it makes the whole number larger. So that also makes this a larger quantity. Conversely, if you have a very large standard deviation, it can bring that DI down, right? Because you're dividing by something large. So for this blazing sevens wager, we have a desirability index of 4.3. Now, just to give you sort of by comparison, when we go to the coverall side bet, this one has a desirability index of 6.5, but now let's look at its win rate. Its win rate is only 0.69 units per 100 hand. You see how much less you're winning at this particular side bet than you would if you were playing blazing sevens? On the other hand, you're going to win far more often. Your standard deviation, instead of being this astronomical 40-something, is only 10.63. What I want to do now is just go through a bunch of side bets. And I'm just going to leave these up on the screen and let you look at these in your own time. You can just stop the frame. But I just want to mention one in particular, which is ordinary card counting at Baccarat. You can count the player or you can count the banker. Look, the win per 100 hands with a $100 wager. I'm not doing the units 1 per 100 hands. I am multiplying that by $100 so we can actually get a dollar figure out of that. Notice the Baccarat card counter is winning about 2 cents per 100 hands. Notice the desirability index is about 0.01. I couldn't make it any lower. It is absolutely the worst game. There is no such thing as a professional Baccarat card counter. Now, over at the far side on the right, I put down the risk. So the risk is just telling you roughly what that desirability index, where it puts this game. So ordinary Baccarat player and banker, that has minimal risk. So what is the first one here that has high risk? Color match. Then this bet called Easy 6. Lucky 9s is extreme. Going on to the next group, we see these natural 9 and natural 8 side bets that pay 9 to 1 are in the extreme category. Then we have a bunch of side bets that are at most low to medium. And again, just the ordinary tie bet is minimal. So the tie bet at Baccarat is minimal here. The other thing that can happen with Baccarat side bets is team play, right? This is where a group of people play together. And I made just a very recent video about the 5 treasures that shows you what the win rate is for that. And here I've included the DI that I didn't have before. I've also made a previous video about the Your Way Egalite, and we see that one has an extreme vulnerability. So here are my recommendations for protecting Baccarat side bets. As usual, watch for wagers late in the shoe. That's when the true count is most likely to exceed the trigger. Watch for a group of players making the same wagers together. You might have a team that is playing the side bet together, especially if it's something like Your Way Galate or the Five Treasures. Watch for odd scorekeeping. The thing about Baccarat that makes it different from blackjack is people can actually keep score on a sheet of paper, which means that somebody who is savvy may figure out a way of just using the counting system right there on that score sheet and keeping track of the running count and true count manually rather than having to remember it. Watch for wagers on the side bet that are large compared to the main wager. So we know that people who are card counting, they don't want to lose much money on the main game, so they might bet table minimum on the player or banker until the count's in their favor, and at that time they will make a wager on the side bet that is as large as they can given the constraints of their wager on the main bet. And if you have a rule like whatever your side bet is, it can't exceed your main game wager, then you will see them betting minimum on the main game until that side bet is in their favor, and then they will bet equally on those two in whatever amount they can. All right, use software to confirm betting correlation. Again, you can go to my website, which is advancedadvantageplay.com. Go to the download section and you can find some software there. Train key personnel. You want to keep your dealers informed about card counting so they can identify when it might be happening. Of course, your pit crew, your surveillance, all the key people need to know about this. And use a second cut card. So I do not advise moving the cut card for the main game back to 75 cards or 100 cards or something, because it's all about time and motion. You want to keep the game going. You want to deal as many hands from a shoe as you possibly can. If you are really scared that you might be getting hit with a very vulnerable side bet that your casino is offering, then simply insert a second cut card, say 100 cards from the end, and that way when that cut card comes out, you can say, okay, no more wagers on the side bet past this point. You could do that selectively for certain players, or you could just make it a policy for your casino, but it is an easy way to protect yourself while not losing too much in time and motion. So, okay, everyone, that's about it for today. If you really want to beat the game of Baccarat, the way to do it is to count a side bet. And if you buy my book on Amazon, it is $17.77. Then hopefully this little presentation also will help you understand the various tables and information I give you in the chapters on side bets. So, all right, everybody, Elliot Jacobson. See you later.